they cannot reproduce outside a living host cell. They cannot live on their own. That's what it means. They possess only one type of DNA or RNA. Then they depend on the ribosome of the host cell for protein synthesis. You know, we say ribosomes are necessary for synthesis of protein. But for viruses, they don't have personal viruses, that is viruses of ribosome rather. They don't have ribosome on their own, so they use their host ribosome for their protein synthesis. Viruses, also like bacteria, occur in three different shapes. They occur in different shapes. They occur in shapes. They have the spherical shaped bacteria, the rod shaped, and the tadpole shaped bacteria. The tadpole shaped viruses. Three different shapes of viruses: spherical shaped viruses, rod shaped viruses, and tadpole shaped viruses. They exist as inactive particles made up of a core nucleic acid surrounded by a protein coat in which lies the DNA or RNA in animal virus and RNA in plant virus. You can see the picture of the structure of a virus. They have inactive particles made up of nucleic acid. Then we have a protein coat that is surrounded by a DNA or RNA in animal virus, then just RNA in plant virus. Then examples of plant virus include the mosaic disease of cassava, of tobacco, of potato and tomato. This disease affects this group of plants that I've just mentioned: potato, tomato, tobacco, and cassava. Also, another example of virus in plants include the swollen shoots of cocoa. They also affect the shoot of cocoa. So when you look at a cocoa plant that's affected, you discover that the shoot is swollen. It's an effect of a virus. Animal viruses include smallpox, poliomyelitis, measles, AIDS, hepatitis, chickenpox, rabies, common cold, yellow fever. We have a lot of viruses in animals, so these are just a few examples of viruses. Then this is the structure of a virus. Okay, the structure of a virus, you have the capsid there. Then we also have the surface protein. You know, I said earlier that viruses depend on the host cell. Host cell's ribosome for its own protein synthesis. So you have the surface protein there. Then the RNA or DNA structure. I said in plants you have RNA, but in plant cell it is only RNA. But in animal cell it could either be the DNA or RNA that you find in a virus. Now we move on to the beneficial effects of microorganisms. You know, when you hear microorganisms, say, oh, your hands are full of microorganisms, and the next thing that comes to your mind is that, oh, it's harmful. No, microorganisms are not always harmful. In fact, we have beneficial microorganisms, and there is a level to which the body can tolerate microorganisms. There are some microorganisms that are responsible for healthy living, but when they get out of number, that is when their number increase beyond the level the body can control, then that is when they become harmful. So we'll now be looking at what beneficial effects do microorganisms have around us. First is seen in the fermentation process. The brewing of wine, in your bread making yeast. So that's it's microorganisms that help. Even when you are processing your cassava, it has to ferment, and it is microorganism that is responsible for that fermentation. If fermentation does not occur, you don't have your wine brewing, you don't have your bread, and other things. So fermentation process is made possible by microorganisms. Then it's also useful in your production of ice cream. I know you like ice cream, so microorganism is used in production of ice cream, still in that fermentation process line. Then your cheese will also coagulate. Milk will coagulate in forming your cheese. Then in production of butter too, microorganism is used. Also in the production of antibiotics, you know, antibiotics are just antibacterial. The bacteria, there are sometimes that are deadened to attack the one that is in the body. So the antibiotics are deadened bacterial cells or that have been made impotent of affecting you, but is now counter affecting the living bacteria. So those drugs are made up of microorganisms. They are also, the bacteria in the body that you are treating or other microorganisms are living. But the antibiotics now are also microorganisms, but that have been conquered so that they will deal with the ones that the human body is now possessing that is harmful to the body. So that's how we came about antibiotics. Also, another beneficial effect of microorganisms is in nitrogen fixing activity of the bacteria. For instance, in the root nodules of legume crops, we have your cowpea and groundnuts as examples of legumes. Now, there are some bacteria that attach to the root of those plants that helps to fix nitrogen into the soil. So that's a very good effect of microorganisms there. Also, digestion of cellulose by bacteria in the gut of animal. I said there are bacteria all over in our body. There are microorganisms, but they are levels. They should not get to a level that is harmful. That's just it. So you have bacteria in the gut of animals that help them to digest cellulose. Animals consume grasses majorly. So the cellulose in the bacteria in their gut helps them to digest cellulose. Also, microorganisms are used in conversion of hides and skin to leather. The skin of animals, they are used in making your bags, your shoes, your belts, and the likes. So microorganisms, bacteria especially, is used in converting those hide and skin to leather that you can carry about and use. Also, putrefying bacteria decompose dead matter for soil fertility. There are some microorganisms that work on some biological matters that they decompose it and make its fertility available. The fertilizer, we talk about compost manure. It's the work of some microorganisms that work on that decay some material so that it will be available for the plants use and the soil becomes fertile. So that's another beneficial effect of microorganisms. Now we come to the harmful effects of microorganisms. I know you are so used to that one. Number one, microorganism causes diseases when they are in numerous number, when their number is beyond the number that the body can tolerate. They cause diseases in man, such as cholera, measles. Those are examples of diseases that microorganisms can cause in man. Also in plants, I mentioned the mosaic disease of cassava, potato, tobacco, and the likes. That's another disease causing microorganism in plants. Also in animals, example of disease that microorganisms cause in animals, we have rabies that you find in dogs, then fowl pests. That's another example of animal disease caused by microorganism. Also, microorganism causes food spoilage. When you put your food down, after a while you discover that, for instance, your bread, you discover that mold starts growing on it, or you don't preserve your food very well, it just gets spoiled. So that's an harmful effect of bacteria. Also, deterioration of material, that is destruction, spoiling. When other things aside food now get spoiled, it's microorganisms that are also responsible for the deterioration or the decay. Now we talk about ways of controlling vectors. Vectors are animals that carry diseases, disease-causing agents. Vectors are disease-causing agents. They carry disease-causing agents. So how do we control the vectors? For instance, let me explain vectors again. Vectors are organisms that carry these microorganisms that causes diseases. They are not themselves causers of diseases. That is, vectors don't cause diseases on their own, but they carry organisms that cause diseases. So they are like a middleman between the disease causing organisms and the other organisms that they want to affect or infect. And what are the ways by which we can control these vectors? Number one is elimination. You make sure that they are not found around you. And another way of controlling vector is by killing them at their developmental stages, when they not really become adults. You know, we have various stages of growth, from egg to larva, larva to pupa, then to adult. Before they get to the adult stage, you can kill them. Then we can use preventive medicines, like you can use some drugs to prevent some diseases before they appear. You know, there are some drugs that you can use to prevent malaria, for example. Then another way of controlling vectors is to prevent their bites. You know, mosquito is a vector of malaria. It carries plasmodium, which causes malaria. So that's why you should prevent its bites. Even another example of vector is dog. It carries rabies. So prevent the bites of such vectors so that you don't get infected by them. Then another way of controlling vectors is to destroy their breeding places. For instance, when you clear bushes around your house, you take care of the drainage, that you don't have eggs of mosquitoes settling in there. Then you prevent the vectors. Ways by which we can control pathogens. Now, the causal agents, not the vectors now, but the causal agents, those are the pathogens. Vectors carry pathogen. So how can you control the pathogens themselves? You use medicine such as antibiotics.